Hello and welcome to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero, your AI host. If you're new to the channel, I break down every notable hand I play and explain my thought process, giving you the analysis of a pro who's been around for over a decade and a half. For those of you who are already familiar with my channel, I've shown you nothing but wins so far. I mean, in all honesty, I did go on a 21 win tear, but that's incredibly atypical. No one wins like that all the time. Everyone experiences losses. Even the best players can go on tilt from time to time. Even the best players can be in the wrong mindset now and again. However, for the trolls who constantly criticize my play, and for the infidels and naysayers who claim I make up fake stats or show edited footage, I'm going to toss you a little bone to feast on. I feel I need to show my audience the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's only fair that you get a more full picture of what it's like to play poker for a living. And oh boy, there's going to be a whole lot of ugly this episode. But before we get to that, if you've ever played poker at the Wynn Encore in Las Vegas, you're probably familiar with Bobby. He's been a dealer there since it opened. He's the same dealer that dealt me the pocket sevens hand from vlog number 8, where I snap called my opponent with second pair for his entire stack. I was able to grab him for a quick interview. Hey Bobby, how long you been dealing here?
Since 05.
So, 19 years? How long you been dealing to me? 8 years or so, right?
8-10 years I think.
You watched the vlog?
All the time.
So recently I stated like I won 21 sessions in a row. Real or BS?
No, that's real.
So the hands, I pocket sevens and I got that guy for this whole stack. Is that like just me getting lucky? Or is that skill there?
That's skills right there.
Alright, thanks Bobby.
People.
Okay, so now that that's out of the way, for this episode, I'm playing the 2-5 at the Wynn Encore as usual, where I buy in for $1,500, which is 300 big blinds. It's Saturday, July 20th, when I start at 2:36 in the morning. 20 minutes into the session, I limp under the gun +1 with pocket rockets, the Van Damme of this blood sport we know as live action poker. Now, before you mouth off about why I'm limping and how it's a complete noob move, I've already seen some absolute madness just in the short time I've been sitting at the table. The guy to my direct left has been raising every single hand, calls huge 3-bets, calls continuously on every board, and then ends up going to showdown with bottom pair. Yeah, we're talking about that kind of player. And El Pollo Loco. So right on cue, my crazy chicken friend opens to 25 in middle position. Only the cutoff calls. So of course, as anticipated, I limp brace to 125 to isolate the poultry. He calls without skipping a beat, but the cutoff folds, which is the desired result. The flop comes 3, 9, 2, rainbow. This is about as dry as it gets without flopping a set. As usual, I start with a down bet to 50, incentivizing 2 random overcards to call. If this were a normal player, I'd probably go a little bit higher, like 80 to 100, so that he wouldn't get the right odds with some small to middling pocket pair. But since we're not dealing with a normal human being, I think 50 is sufficient. He calls, so we go to a turn which is a 10 of hearts, putting 2 hearts on board. Alright, time to ramp up the heat. I increase my bet sizing to 60%, to a bet of 235. If he has any piece of this pie, or even a naked gut shot, like if he's holding King Jack or King Queen, he's gonna make the call. Which he does, leaving himself 600 behind. The river is an ace of hearts, which I absolutely do not care for. I don't need it. I hate to see it. I don't want anything to do with it. If he's calling me light, he's going to hate seeing that card. If he floated the flop with air, he might have just gotten there with a backdoor flush. If he's holding 4-5, because he's the type of maniac that would play such a hand, he just got there with a straight. I contemplate what to do. I could check, but that's not the type of card he could try to bluff on. He'll most likely check the action back if he has any kind of one-pair holding with some showdown value. It's more likely to hit my range if I were bluffing the entire way with a hand like Ace-King. Eventually, I decide to shove, because I think he's the type of guy who wants to put on a cape on the weekends and become a hero. He shows a deuce and tanks for a full minute and 15 seconds, with literally nothing but bottom pair. He says he beats hands such as 5-6 and 7-8. This is the sort of maniac we're dealing with. Sadly, he does put in the fold eventually, but at least we're up $480 less than a half hour into our session. About 25 minutes later, everyone folds around to me in the small blind. I'm holding pocket deuces. I ask the big blind if he would like to chop. Even as a professional, I chop when playing games with a rake, regardless of my hand. It's just a courtesy since a $5 rake is pretty bad when it's a heads-up hand. Here, you can listen to the original audio. Do you chop or you want to play?
I only chop with people I like, so I don't like you yet.
Okay.
Let's go.
Okay, so after he says he doesn't want to chop with me, I open the action up to 15. And of course, he 3-bets me to 75, which I call. I deceptively say that if the flop has a 2, then it's all him, since he always seems to have a 2 in his hand. The flop comes ace, 10, 2 with 2 clubs. Da-da-da-dun-da-da! Normally, with any other opponent, I may actually lead here. Who says that people only donk bet with capped hands? Because I certainly don't fit that mold. However here, since I'm not dealing with a normal person, I start with a check. Unfortunately, my opponent checks it back. Weird. I would have thought that he'd bet 100% of his range there. The turn brings a 10 of diamonds. Okay, not loving this turn. I always prefer a naked set over bottom boat. Sure, it turns a flush or a straight draw into a dead draw, but on the other hand, any naked ace now has 4 outs, and a 10 now has a ton of outs. So it's time to go for some value. I lead for a 40% pot bet of 60. My opponent suddenly raises me to 280. This is a massive raise. This is the dream. I guess he has a 10? Time to go for some extreme value. I put in the re-raise to 650. My opponent doesn't take too long before putting in the call with 600 behind. The river brings a 9 of spades. If he has 9-10, I'm just going to double him up here. I shove all in. Not only do I evade a snap call, but my opponent goes into a massive tank. We're talking like constipation hard. He tanks for almost 2 full minutes while he pulls up my early vlogs on his phone to try to get some info. No joke! He's literally sitting there watching my vlogs to see what kind of player I am. He says he has an ace. He's putting me on complete air. He doesn't even think I have a 10. I guess I was right about my earlier assessment that he wants to put a cape on and make a hero call. Eventually, he makes the call. Well, I mean, he's right. I don't have a 10. I table my boat and stack my opponent for over $1,300 in a hand that we could have just chopped. We're only 45 minutes into the session and I'm already up $1,736. I mean, it doesn't get better than this, right? Already up bundles while on the table with a complete donator. What can possibly go wrong?
Wah, wah, wah.
30 minutes later, I open to 15 in the hijack with 7-9 of spades. The maniac 3-bets me to 50 in the cutoff. Damn, I really hate having him to my left. Everyone else folds. Literally the very last hand, he just 3-bet another guy with 7-10 of diamonds to 60. When the original raiser 4-bets him to 245, he still makes the call, flops a straight, and stacks the poor guy for over $1,500. Against a loosey-goosey like this should just be a fold out of position. Even if you make your hand, he might not have anything to call you with. However, the price point isn't bad, and I know that if I make anything strong, he's not folding even something as weak as bottom pair, so I make the call. The flop comes ace, king, king, rainbow with 1 spade. Oh great, I have absolutely nothing at all. So of course, I check. My opponent checks it back, which isn't telling at all on that sort of flop. The turn is a 5 of spades, putting 2 spades on board. This should just be a check again unless in position. But at the time, I'm thinking like, if he has air, I can just get him to lay his hand here. Or if he has just a Broadway draw, I can get him off his hand on the river if we both miss. So I lead for 30 into the pot of 100. Unfortunately, that's not good enough for my opponent. He raises to 100. I contemplate folding. Against any normal human being, this is a snap fold. I could very well be drawing dead here. In the best case scenario where he just has a naked king and not a made boat, I still only have 7 outs as opposed to a clean 9. However, here, I'm lulled by the fact that my opponent can't fold. If the river brings another spade that's not a Broadway card, I plan to massively overbet the pot for like 600. It's only another 70 for me to call and potentially win $1,000. I end up making the call. Unfortunately, the river is a jack of hearts. I brick completely. If anything, I'm not positive that a jack of spades would even be clean. So I can only check. My opponent checks back and shows pocket 8s for the ultimate value raise on the turn. I guess we had a lot more outs than I thought, but we still got owned. For this next hand, I open to 20 in the +1 with ace-king offsuit. The crazy guy 3-bets me to 75. Everyone else folds. Against a normal player, I probably 4-bet here to about 250. Unfortunately, I'm up against a different sort of beast. This guy never folds pre-flop to any normal raise, and a hand like ace-king doesn't play very well out of position against a guy who has an infinite range and no fold equity. Believe it or not, you actually missed 2 out of 3 flops with a non-made hand like ace-king. I decide to just make the call. The flop comes deuce, 4, ace with 2 diamonds and 1 heart. I start with a check. My opponent c-bets for 75. This board is incredibly connected and not exactly the type of board I would ever slow play. Not that I would ever slow play one pair anyways, so I put in the check raise to $275, hoping my opponent has some kind of 3-outer like ace-queen all the way down to ace-10. My opponent makes the call. The turn is a 5 of clubs, putting a possible 1 card straight out there. I'm hoping that didn't hit him, but at the same time, I can't show weakness. If I were to check here, 1, it could give him a free card to whatever he needs. 2, with the size of the pot, he could put in a massive bet that would make me very uncomfortable with just one pair, especially now that he has me covered. With those two things in mind, I put in another bet of 300. My opponent calls again. The river brings a 6 of hearts. The flush gets there. There's a one-liner to a straight. All the combinations of small cards that he could be holding make 2 pairs. I'm not so excited here. My only hope is that my opponent is holding a big ace as opposed to a small one. I check. I don't know what I would do if he smashes the pot with like a 1k bet or something. Against any other opponent, it'd be a clear fold, but this guy could have anything. He might be playing deuce 7 offsuit for funsies for all I know. Thankfully, he checks the action back. I show my hand, thinking I'm good. Unfortunately, I am not. He shows ace 5 offsuit for 2 pairs. If I had 4-bet preflop, I would most certainly have lost much more in this hand. So at least I have that small comfort as I look for a box of tissues to cry into. With this loss, I'm only up $748 2 hours into the session. 15 minutes later, I open to 20 in the +1 with king-queen offsuit. The middle position, cutoff, and button all call. We go 4 ways out of position to a flop of king, 4, 8, with 1 heart and 2 diamonds. I lead with a bet of 60. On these types of connected flops with only 1 high card, I don't mess around. I start with a strong bet right away. The middle position calls before the cutoff shoves for 365. The button folds. If my opponent flopped a set, for his stack size, I'm just going to pay him off. This is an easy call for me. There are no 2-pair combinations I need to worry about from any sane person. The middle position folds behind me. The turn brings the ace of hearts, which is not my favorite card because the ace high flush draw does get there, and the river brings the 3 of clubs. My opponent shows jack 6 of diamonds for a missed flush draw. There's not much to say about this hand. If you're still playing those sorts of cards, then you need to watch more of my vlogs. We're back in the green for $1,325. Before this next hand, I change seats to get position on our KFC friend. 3 people limp in front of me. I limp on the button with 5-7 of diamonds. The small blind completes and the big blind checks. We go 6-handed to a flop of 2, king, 8 with 2 diamonds. We flop a flush draw with a backdoor straight draw. When my opponents check to me, I bet 20 in position. Only the chicken wing calls, and everyone else folds. The turn is a 7 of clubs. My opponent checks again. Awesome! We now make a pair to go along with our flush draw. I should either slam this turn hard or check the action back. I'm in position after all. With a guy who never folds with any piece of the board, I suggest checking back. Crazy guys are actually my kryptonite. Just being near them makes me play worse. On top of that, my psychological edge, which is normally massive against regular players and even pros, gets thrown out the window. The insanity takes over, and I make a weak half-pot bet of 35. In any other situation and against any other opponent, this should be a full pot-size bet, or even possibly an overbet, anywhere from 60 to 100. My opponent mocks me for being a weak, pathetic fool.
You weak, pathetic fool.
And puts in the check raise to 200. I think he smashed that turn with a hand like 7-8. I would normally have 14 outs against a naked king, but against a hand like 7-8, I'm reduced to only 8 outs, since the 8 of diamonds won't be clean, and I can't make 2 pairs or even trips. With the pot size being so small compared to his turn raise, I don't think I can possibly squeeze out enough on the river, even if one of my much-needed diamonds hit. It would need to be a pretty huge overbet, close to like 500 or so, on a board where it'd be extremely obvious considering the flop contained no other type of draw. So without getting the right implied odds, I just suck up my small loss and make the fold. For this next hand, I have a couple of red jacks in the big blind, but since the small blind bought the button, I'm first to act and open for 25. Under the gun and +1 both call, but everyone else folds. We go 3 ways out of position to a flop of 4, 2, 4 with 2 hearts. I lead for a half-pot bet of 40. Both players call. This is getting a bit dicey. One of them could easily have a 4 here, or even pocket deuces. So when the king of diamonds hits the turn, I check for pot control. I would also make this check even if it were an innocuous 9 or a 10 or something. Fortunately, the action gets checked around. So when the river brings a 9 of spades, I go for a little bit of value with a 40% pot bet of 80. Unfortunately, no one has anything to lick me up, so I take down the small pot. 15 minutes later, I get dealt the exact same hand, 2 red jacks again. Under the gun opens to 15. The +1 calls. I 3-bet to 75 in the middle position. Everyone else folds, but the original raiser and the +1 both call. The flop comes 7, 8, 9, rainbow. Both players check to me. Okay, either one of them could easily have flopped a set here. However, I have a good clean 6 outs to trump a set, and also block the nuts with my hand. I can go either way here between putting out another small bet of like 80 or checking for pot control. Here, I elect for option B and check the action back. Keep in mind, this is only done because we're all quite deep with starting stacks of about 300 big blinds. In a regular 100 big blind game, this is just a standard pot size bet here. The turn brings a 5 of clubs, putting a 1 card straight on board if anyone is carrying a 6. Fortunately, both opponents check to me again. It would be extremely rare and outrageous for me to be holding a 6 here, but not completely out of the question because you guys have seen me 3-bet with hands like 6-7 suited before. So knowing this, I am almost certain I have both of my opponents beat at this point. I think the best possible hand I can be up against is pocket 10s. I go for some small value with a bet of 100, charging for the backdoor flush draw and any naked 1 pair. To my surprise, both opponents call. The river brings in a horrid 6 of spades, putting all 5 cards to a straight on board. Suddenly, the original raiser leads for a bet of 300. The +1 tanks for a while before calling. Mother father. The hand I most likely put one of my opponents on gets there. I mean, I do block the nuts, but then again, so does pocket 10s. How likely would it be for me to get one of my opponents to fold pocket 10s, or even just a naked 10 for that matter? Not very likely, I don't think. I'm not about to call 300 to at best chop 3 ways, so after thinking it over for a moment, I make the fold. The original raiser shows 4-5 of diamonds for absolute diddly squat and no reason to call the turn. The +1 shows ace-8 of spades for another absolutely ridiculous hand that shouldn't have called the turn either. They chop my money. Mind blown. I'm raging. There are too many crazy chickens on this table. I thought we were playing 2-5 deep stack, not 1-2 bingo poker. To be honest, this should have been my cue to leave. I'm 3 hours into the session and still up just shy of $1,200. There's simply too much kryptonite on the table. I can analyze and beat the brain at poker, but I can't fathom what goes on in the head of Pinky. On top of that, I'm not playing my best game, and I'm also rattled. I should have just left. But why do my legs feel so heavy? For this next hand, the under the gun and +1 both limp. I open to 20 in the low jack with king-queen offsuit. Thinking back, this should have been a bigger open, like 25 or 30. But we all know my mind has already started its descent into madness. The hijack and both limpers call, so we go 4 ways to a flop of 3, jack, queen, with 2 hearts and 1 club. When the action gets checked to me, I lead with a bet of 50. The hijack calls behind me, but the other 2 players fold. We go to a turn, which is the 4 of hearts. This is a very clear check. My opponent bets 110. Without a single heart in my hand, this is just an easy fold. The hijack is what's known as a calling station. They call continuously with weak hands, but whenever they bet, they almost always have the goods. I'm not beating a whole lot on this board, so I let my hand go. For this hand, under the gun opens to 15. The hijack and cutoff both call. I 3-bet to 100 on the button with ace-king, which would be the same sizing I would use for any big made hand like 10s through aces. Only the hijack calls, who's my nemesis from earlier with the 4-5 of diamonds. The flop comes king, 8-8 rainbow. I have this board pretty locked up. He will almost always be holding either a small pocket pair or suited connectors with the price he paid pre-flop. So when he checks, I put in a small down bet to 50. He makes the call. The turn is a 7 of hearts, changing nothing unless he is holding pocket 7s. So when he checks the action over, I increase my bet sizing to a very affordable $100. This bet sizing still allows me to escape if he puts in a large check raise. Thankfully, he just folds, so we pocket a small chunk of change. I'm still up $1,219 at the start of this next hand. We're at 4 hours and 15 minutes into our session, which is already slightly past what I comfortably like to play for. The straddle is on. The low jack opens to 30. He's our nemesis from the last hand. The button calls. I have pocket 8s in the small blind. I could 3-bet here a very small percentage of the time, but most of the time I'm only going to call to set mine since my hand doesn't play very well out of position on most boards. So that's what I do here. We go 3 ways out of position to a flop of 5, 7, 2 with 2 spades. My hand is unlikely to improve, and I'd also like to deny equity to random overcards, so I lead with a 40% pot bet of 45 into 105. In hindsight, against an opponent as loose and unconventional as the low jack has proven to be, I should have adjusted my play and led for a massive pot bet of a full $100. That's the difference with being an exploitative player. You need to adjust your bet amounts to your audience. How do I prevent myself from being exploited with a donk bet? Well, if you watch the vlog, you would know I also lead with sets. Whatever style you play, whether it's GTO or exploitative, always sneak in a monster into your otherwise weak bet range so that opponents can have something to think about in the back of their mind when they contemplate your range. Here, the low jack makes the call, but the button folds. The turn is a 6 of spades. completing the front door flush draw in several different straights, including the front door open-ender if my opponent were holding a hand like 3-4 suited, which is very much in his arsenal of opening hand ranges. So I'm forced to check. My opponent makes a considerable half-pot bet of 100. With pocket 8s, I'm admittedly open-ended to a higher straight if my opponent were holding 3-4, and I also have a flush draw with my 8 of spades as well. However, think about this rationally. Would my opponent ever give me any value if either of those hands hit? Also, I would be drawing completely dead to any mediocre flush. This is a clear fold. It would also be an easy fold if I were within my first 4-hour time frame and not rattled by several different unconventional plays from my opponents. I've warned the audience that my play gets dramatically worse the longer my session stretches on. Also, no one is immune to tilt, just like no one is immune to temptation given the right circumstances. So here I make the call. The river is another 6 of clubs, pairing the board. I check again. I counterfeit 5-7, but that's about it. My opponent puts in another milky bet of 150. On this type of board and run out, I only beat 2 hands. I counterfeit 5-7, but that hand would have already raised me on the flop. I also beat Ace-7, but would such a hand really go for this insanely thin value? Incredibly unlikely, despite my opponent being on the looser side. I lose to all flushes, all straights, and I even lose to the 4-6 semi-bluff that backdoors into trips. The only hand I legitimately beat is Ace-High airball, with like Ace-3 or Ace-4 with 1 spade. There are too many hands I'm losing to versus how many hands I'm beating. This is both mathematically and psychologically a clear fold. But I'm not working with all my marbles right now, so I make the call. My opponent shows 8-9 offsuit for the turn nut straight. See what I mean? You just burn money when you're not playing your A game. The very next hand, the straddle is still on. The cutoff limps. I open to 45 on the button with Ace-Queen offsuit. Only the cutoff calls. The flop comes Ace-5-6 with 1 club and 2 spades. My opponent checks. On such a wet flop, I start with a half-pot bet of 50. He makes the call. The turn brings in a 6 of clubs, putting 2 clubs on board as well as the 2 spades, and reducing the likelihood that my opponent is trapping with a set. My opponent checks again. I make the same half-pot bet, but to 100 this time. My opponent makes the call again. The river is a 3 of diamonds. Suddenly, he shoves all in for a slight overbet of 420. This is extremely confusing. We've done some seat changes, but this is the guy I mentioned earlier that is a calling station. They rarely, if ever, bluff. But his line doesn't make any sense to me. Is he really holding 4-7 for the river straight? He check calls the flop, check calls the turn, and then suddenly jams on this nonsensical river? This would be an easy call against any random player, but this is a calling station we're talking about. They simply do not bluff. I need to make this fold. I know deep in my gut I need to make this fold, but we all know what I'm doing. I make the call, and my opponent shows pocket 5s for a flop set and turn boat. With this loss, we're now only up $274 after 4 hours and 30 minutes of playing. Play long, play wrong. If you don't take a break when you feel yourself getting pushed off your rocker, you continue to play bad. I'm now massively upstuck from my height only an hour into the session, where I was up over $1,700. My only saving grace is that I finally cash out 45 minutes later. I should definitely have left at the 3-hour mark, when I felt myself getting rattled. When I were younger, I would have stayed with my butt glued to the table until I either climbed back to my height and chips or busted completely, which is the much more likely scenario. In for $1,500 and out for $1,817 for a meager profit of $317 after 5 hours and 23 minutes of playtime. If you've stayed until the very end, I have some really exciting news. Firstly, I've gotten all of my affairs in order to start the cash raffle. In order to qualify, you need to be a subscriber to the channel. Like this video, and post in the comments what you like the most, either about this video or the channel in general. Then pick a number between 20 to 400. In the next video that I release, I'm going to roll some dice and pick a winner. The same process will continue for the next several videos. Each winner will receive $100 from yours truly, and will then also be put into a lottery amongst the other winners to square off for the grand prize. Roughly 1 month from the release of this video, I'm going to roll some dice again and select the grand prize winner. That winner can either select $500 or choose to be my next acolyte. I'm still helping Josh to tighten up his game, but I've already given him all the tools he needs to continue to be a profiting player. I've turned him from one of the worst 1-3 players at the table to a regularly winning player who's made nearly $7,000 just in the last month of playing 1-3. Congratulations, Josh. You've now graduated to the ranks of Sith, which means I have room for a new acolyte. In other news, my Patreon is up and running if you're interested in seeing more of the coaching series. I also offer hourly coaching services. You can find my rates on my Patreon page as well. If you like this video, you know what to do. especially if you want a chance at some free cash monies. As always, I hope to see you in the next video.